Welcome back to the Kingsway podcast, where in this episode, we are continuing part 2 of a conversation we started a week or two ago on episode 193, starting the conversation about faith and art, how Christians should engage art and entertainment, how Christians who aren't artistic in the traditional sense, guitar, some music thing, some painting thing, still engage in creating and in art and in bringing stuff to the world like God does. So right now we're going to come back in the middle of this conversation and finish out talking with Jeremiah about faith and art. Hope you enjoy the episode. What did you say earlier about art?
Yeah.
Art is the way we put meaning into the world or express.
You're expressing yourself into the world through the things that you create, or you're seeing yourself within the creation.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the last scary question.
Maybe not last question, but
maybe not one of my last scary questions that I can think of, and I'm sure more will flow. But there's something in art that demands, in my mind, authenticity. So it's the thought process behind, and I think I alluded to this before we started the podcast, but just I struggle sometimes how, especially in the Christian world, we try to clean our art up so much that it becomes unauthentic. And I see this the most maybe, and I'm not trying to be bashed, but like every now and then some of the like 90s and early 2000s Christian movies like pop up in a reel that even like now as like a Christian, you like cringe that you're like, like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
And I feel like at times if we're not careful on the grounds of holy or whatever we want to say, legalism, we'll make our art have to just be a certain way. Do you feel that tension at all? I've hand in sometimes both worlds. I feel like.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we want to try to present the gospel message, well. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on us as Christians sometimes.
Yeah.
I've sat down many times with my guitar and tried to write a song for God and come out unsuccessful. But I even in that unsuccessful attempt, it's still worship,
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that, these attempts that didn't hit as well with these Christian artists, it was still worship in some way.
Yeah.
But how it's received, if we're not taking that and ingesting it and making that something that we can carry on with our life, like it was just kind of meh, maybe we did kind of, miss the mark a little bit.
Well, like let me push back and say this. What if we just went through the Psalms and we removed all of them that just had things in it that were just horrible?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we would be like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
But yet somehow now we've eliminated that from our spiritual journey.
Mm-hmm.
So you're kind of asking like,
It's not allowed
either
anymore.
is it good that we clean up our art to be squeaky clean, or why
have we done that?
Why
That's my
have we
question. Like,
cleaned up
why have
art?
we not
Yeah, I
admitted
think-
that we want to bash the
Yeah.
enemy's babies' heads
Sure.
on the rocks? Like, that's in Psalms.
That's
Right.
Psalm
Like,
137.
Yeah. It was because we don't know how to deal with that. We don't know how to deal with the darkness of our life a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
And something we were kind of talking about before we recorded was kind of that idea that, we can't have something that's illuminated unless there's darkness present.
It just doesn't. The light doesn't look like light.
Yeah.
It's just white paint.
Right.
Like it's not. And look, I'm not. I have like a theory in my mind around heaven that maybe we can play around with this thought. So the theory, that's probably not mine. I'm probably stealing this from like 7 different books. Probably The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis, if I'm being honest, is one of the ones that I'm quoting and I don't even realize I'm quoting. I'm just that brilliant, Ryan.
Super smart.
But he and I think Eugene Peterson talk about this concept of what if you just switched the way the world worked in heaven and you now broccoli tastes gross and it's not good for you, and gravity no longer kills, but it's actually gentle and it allows you to float down. And the things that are actually bad for you, candy tastes like broccoli, obviously, everything that is in this world. And then our morals. love actually feels like the best thing rather than lust.
Mm.
You know, patience actually feels good rather than being greedy and being impatient. And the world stays that way. Like there's still chances to be impatient, but you want nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And you are aware that that stuff still exists and it's still around, but you have no desire for it anymore. So it's not that you're just a whitewashed tomb, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there's that contrast is still there, and you are still absolutely choosing God of your own accord. I feel like in art, you know, Psalm 13 is like the one that I quoted on stage just a couple of weeks ago, but it's this huge psalm of doubt and just anger at God, but it ends with, but I love you, I worship you,
Right.
you have been good to me. I think I think all good art ends with some sort of hope or message, even as dark as it gets. There has to be some piece of light in it for it to be something that I find value in. Is that?
What do you think about that?
I would agree. You know, there's a guy that I made contact with a while back. He just recorded a podcast called Be Afraid, and it's recorded through Christianity Today.
Wow.
So the same people that did
Rise and Fall
of Marcel. There we go.
Wow.
And he talks about how to fear rightly as a Christian, which is an interesting concept.
I really like that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I like what he says, but I really like that idea.
Yeah. And so he interviews, you know, exorcists and people that have made horror films. And a lot of his conversations kind of come to this point of, yes, there's lots of brutal and like gross things in a lot of these movies, but there's always a message of hope that comes at the end of it.
Yeah.
Because you have to fight through the darkness before you can find the light sometimes, right? And that's kind of our testimony. That's all of our testimonies, that we, you know, once we're dead and now we're alive. You know, and that's how we can relate to God even more, and to these people in the Bible, because that's their story as well. We see it time and time again of people being brought out of something into something. Going back to that same concept I was talking about, we're brought out of into, and that's creation.
I love that idea that there's something inside of me that God longs to draw out of me, and that he's giving me a place, permission, people, a skill set to use. It feels very similar to, you know, the way a teacher will talk about, like, you can do this, but you have to learn how. And so in order to create, it's not that you're not a creative person. It's just you don't know the alphabet yet. And it's not that you can't paint yet. You just haven't learned how the colors work, you know. And
most artists will emulate the people that they enjoy the most, because that's how you learn what, you know, the practices behind the artist. And then you can start taking it your direction after you learn it.
So we should link that podcast. Is it already out?
It's completely done.
We should link that podcast at the bottom of this. But basically what you're saying, one thing you said through that, or seemed to imply, is that, like, horror is not a genre that's off the table for Christians.
Oh, no, not at all.
But
because you think about all the horrific things that happen to people in this world, like, that is not something that we should just look away from, right? And that's kind of our natural tendency, is that, you know, I keep misplacing the word, but how we're not complacent to the world, but we're like, you know what I'm saying? Like, where's the word? It's
apathetic.
right there. Apathetic. That's probably it. Yeah, we're very apathetic to.
So, like the Good Samaritan, like the man's beaten up on the side of the road, and all these priests and religious leaders walk right by him, and actually go across the street to avoid him because they're uncomfortable with the idea that this person is hurt and they'd be in my way, that they would exist in the same world as me, hurting like this.
Or just, there's another school shooting, you know, and then we just don't think about it anymore. Just those kind of things where there's so many horrific, terrible things that happen in our world that we are apathetic to. But that's not where we need to be as Christians. We need to be trying to figure out, like, well, how do we make this better? That's our whole mission, really, is to help make this world better in some light, right?
To not just emulate Jesus in his final mortal sacrifice, also emulate him in, like, healing and caring for the orphan and the widow. And
to be a fulfillment of the law like he was, instead of to simply just live by the law, right?
And so I'm trying to picture the role. So yeah, obviously we're made in the image of God, is what Genesis tells us, and he's the creator. So that tells me naturally every person on the world is a creator in the image of his creator.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if when the world struggles, is it when we're creating the wrong things? Like, is it when we're, because all sin is something good twisted.
Sure.
That's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think even some of the things that we bump up against is there are people trying to create their own kingdoms, create their own empires, create their own realities, change things. But I also think it does, I think in my mind, when you see something healthy, you'll look and people are creating good things.
Mm-hmm.
They're just creating good things, whether it be in a home, in a church,
Mm-hmm.
in a community, at a campus. There's just good things being created that are making room for other people or bolstering other people.
And sometimes those good things are fear-based or are painful because they're, in a good way, pointing out the sin and the evil in something.
And that's why we create bad things, is because of fear as well, though. I think fear is the biggest deterrent to any person.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to learn how to use fear as a catalyst in our lives and not as a deterrent. So we need to learn how to push forward through that and recognize it for what it is, and then figure out how do we now create something out of that that is a more beautiful story on the other side.
I hope this isn't way off track, but I had a previous job I worked at. I just did not get along with my employers, and we had a lot of difficulties. And I talked to my counselor about it, and he said one of the best ways to have a productive conversation with somebody over you, when you're talking about, I'd like to be doing this, or I don't understand why we do this way, is he said, actually talk about what you're afraid of. And it's really hard to dismiss that kind of stuff. So instead of saying, I think we should be doing this, or we need to be doing this, say, I'm afraid of this bad outcome, and that's why I want to do this thing. But what do you think about?
He does this with me, so
okay, yeah,
he does.
That's awesome.
I'm to where if I today at our church, if I propose like, hey, we should actually within the first year of me working there, I proposed at a Christian church that takes communion every week. Hey, we should stop taking communion for Advent, and what I was trying to do is sell him on the idea of Advent and us like not just saying we're waiting on the Lord to show back up, but like living that reality a couple different ways.
Yeah.
And what I said is communion is so important to our church. I'm afraid that if we try to talk about longing and waiting for Jesus and have communion with the present Jesus, that it won't hit as much, but like we will be disagreeing with ourselves in our practice. And I communicated it as a fear.
Oh yeah.
And that's why I won. No, I'm just kidding. That was what led to
it's a very effective way.
Yeah.
It also lets me know your sincerity, that you've thought through things.
And also that as long as that fear is acknowledged and addressed in some way, I'm okay with whatever solution.
Yeah, you put it
I don't
to rest.
need my way.
Yeah, I was going to say, you speak but you're able to go either direction on it most
Whether
of the
it's,
time.
I don't think that fear is as scary as you think it is, or we shouldn't be afraid of that, or I agree with that fear. I see that as an issue, but I'd rather do this other thing about it.
Yeah. Or I agree with the fear, and it is a little scary, but we're still going to do it.
Yeah.
That type of thinking.
Yep.
So let me ask you this, because I've done a lot of thinking on fear, mainly because of our political landscape right now feels very fear-based. See if you agree with me on this. Do you feel like fear is a really strong connection, but it's not very deep? Like it's a good way to get people like on the same page. You shut off the lights, everybody shuts up and goes, what the heck's going on, right? But it's not something that lasts. Unity doesn't last in that moment very long.
Can I answer you with yourself, even though you asked him? You were talking about how great art doesn't exist, or at least isn't created in the fight or flight moments.
Yeah.
Fear drives us to fight or flight.
Yep. So I'm wondering what we create in those moments. It would be the only things that I may not call art.
Yeah. I mean, I think we connect deeply in our fears as well.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
I think that's how we become codependent in a lot of ways, which is
not good.
Yeah, it's unhealthy.
Yeah.
And you can, I mean, that with the political landscape as it is, I think that's what's happening a lot of time is we are connecting deeply in our fear. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. And we're so for our side, right? That, well, if I don't, have this community around me that believes similar things as me, and I'm not, like, we're not connected on something that's going to be beautiful in a lot of ways. It's that fear that we're connected on both sides.
Yeah, because I just think about 9/11. I'm old enough to remember it from high school, but
elementary school.
Fear gripped the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it quickly faded from fear to we have faith in each other.
Yeah,
and it unified, but it didn't unify around how scared we were,
right?
And we just haven't turned that corner and to where we've gotten on the same. I've said something for about 2 to 3 months now that I've been trying to fold and figure out if I still agree with it. But I watch hate and fear unify very quickly, but dissipate very quickly.
Yeah.
And I watch love struggle to unify quickly, but last.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like what Jesus does in his ministry is doesn't play the short game, plays the long game of love.
Mm-hmm.
And so though it ends on a cross, disunified as everyone, over the course of time, it's unified more people than almost any movement in the world. And so that's why the political thing is such a struggle for me, because I'm like, you're asking me in a year to make decisions on unity that I don't feel like love doesn't play that game.
Yeah.
And
if you think about how hard love is and how scary love is.
We're just talking about marriage. It's so hard,
man.
It
is. It's
even
so
a
hard.
good one like I have.
Yeah.
I love my marriage. It's still hard.
Yeah. And how we can unify more so on hate. That seems more natural to us.
So quick.
Yeah. But love is, man, it's difficult. And that's why it's talked about so much in the Bible.
Is that the greatest expression of art?
I think
is
so.
Love.
Yeah. That's the thing that I'm not usually a person who goes out of my way to experience experience horror as a genre. But I was compelled by listening to John Krasinski talk about A Quiet Place when it was first released, saying that he isn't a huge fan of horror and made a horror movie. But he was like, it's not a horror movie because I want to scare people. It's a love letter to my family in the genre of horror. And I was so compelled by that, where it's not a story about monsters and the monsters are the main characters and everything else is kind of off to the side. It's a story about a father's love for his kids in one of the scariest possible settings.
Yeah.
That's wild.
And so it had fear, and the villain, the monsters, the whatever, are very animalistic rather than calculated and cunning and whatever.
But see, I think that plays out perfectly because the fear unifies them in the movie a bunch, but the thing that makes their connection last is their love for each other.
Yeah.
So they can get on the same page in fear for a moment, but the thing that, like, at night when they're laying there playing the games or doing, like, it's the love. It's not the fear outside of the room. Yeah. Can we just talk about how we're being serenaded while we're doing this, by the way? We're like being serenaded.
I think our mics, our podcast equipment is so good that the listener can't hear this.
I know, but it's like, cool. Like, we're talking about, is love the good? I'm like, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah. Or just the fact that, like, he would put himself in danger for his family. Like, that's a big point of it, too.
Self-sacrifice.
We love sacrifices.
People
love.
were selling each other out in that movie a little bit. You didn't see that many people, but like you could see the evidence of people like wanting to get away so they would hurt somebody else, or like
push them over.
Honestly, the remains of people who probably did that. Yep. But their family in the movie was like, we watch out for each other. We'll create a distraction somewhere else so you can run free. We'll put ourselves in harm's way.
Yeah.
And even the opening scene of that movie, how he runs back to his kid when he puts the battery in the toy he found and it makes noise. His face as he's dead sprinting to imminent danger.
Yeah.
And the grief that comes from not succeeding in that endeavor was like so compelling to me, even though it's a movie about gory death and whatever. Like,
oh yeah, those types of tragedies too. And tragedies are one of my favorite movies to watch. I am like oh my gosh.
This would have been a good preface to this, is that Trevor's movie and TV favorites are not squeaky clean.
No, there are movies that are like Manchester by the Sea. It's probably like Casey Affleck. I've probably never even seen it.
I haven't.
Yeah.
No.
It's just a story about a man that had some devastating thing happen in his life and is a shell of a person and you don't know what it is. And the whole movie walks you through the ashes of his former life as he buries his brother. And comes to a dramatic moment where you find out what happened and then him reuniting with the person that it hurt and them having to reconcile. And they don't.
Yeah.
And then the end of the movie is him just kind of going back to life. And to me, it's this beautiful like struggle of like, we're all in process and the worst can happen and we're going to still have to figure out how to move on.
Yeah.
And anyway, movies like that to me are more helpful and art-filled. And sometimes it's in the current life situations that we're in when we find out our son's autistic and we find out certain things are going on medically with people that I love that aren't going to be fixed. So I find myself relating to this, like, I can do this,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I can make this. And I think that's what, when I say love is the best description of art, I think the best art that we've ever seen came from a place of deep love of music or deep love of painting or deep love of a person or deep love of a religion,
Yeah.
a deep love of a movement.
Or a genre.
A genre,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, when you see Steven Spielberg make movies, it's this deep love for cinema. It's this deep love for, you know, and Beethoven wrote music because that was his love language almost. So
And I think that's why Iron Man 1, Avengers, Infinity War were good movies.
Mhm.
Because there was like a love of filmmaking in them and a love of story. Maybe I'm not making a great point. Maybe there are way better movies for this. But I'm trying to use this world to say the reason those movies were good is because those characters were loved and those were good storytellers who knew how to tell about motivations and whatever. But then you get to later Marvel movies and you're like, this is a waste of time.
yeah, you're not
Because it's
invested.
about the plot points. It's not about the motivating factors, the love, the whatever of filmmaking or the love that these characters have for each other, the longing, the revenge, the whatever. It's just about like, isn't this a cool spaceship blowing up? Isn't this a cool
Yeah.
or whatever?
Have you guys ever heard of the Satanic Panic in the 80s?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I don't like the devil.
Okay. Well, it all revolved around Dungeons and Dragons, D&D.
Yeah.
And
Stranger Things season 4
Sure.
talks about that.
It's true. But it was just because people didn't understand it. They were scared of it, right? Like it's literally a game of the mind. Like it's somebody creating a
I played
story.
it.
Yeah.
I love it.
I do
I
too.
love it.
Yeah.
I
It's
love
one of my, I'm a huge nerd. I love board games. I love
Are you a
card
dungeon
games.
master?
I have dungeon. Yeah.
Love
I have been a DM in the past.
That's awesome. I didn't
but-
want to say DM because I didn't
Yeah,
think they know what it
Dungeon
was.
Master. There we go. Yeah, but the whole
Designated
concept
marksman.
is we're creating a story for people to be a part of, and they get to create their own characters, and they get to interact with the story that you've put in front of them. And yeah, there's lots of bad things, like evil things that you're fighting, but it's like evil versus good. Like that's the whole concept of it.
Yeah.
And it was even like created by some Christian people. You know, it's just this whole thing is like when people were so scared of it. And Harry Potter was the same way. You know?
We've had a whole episode on Harry Potter.
So like,
we love this.
It's when we don't understand something, when we're afraid of it, there's a panic that happens.
Let's break the fear of Dungeons and Dragons right now. It's the easiest way to do this. I've seen this. Like, I don't know if you've seen this. You probably haven't. I've seen it going around. Henry Cavill is meeting with a podcaster, and they'd have never heard of Dungeons and Dragons or Warhammer or any of this. And he just goes, "You want to play?" And he goes, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "You want to play right now?" And he's like, "Okay." He's like, "All right, you're a warrior. You have a sword. There's a goblin running across this field right at you. What do you want to do?" And he's like, "What can I do?" He's like, "What do you want to do?" He's like, "Can I throw anything at him?" I was like, "I don't know. There are rocks around." And he's like, "Pick up this rock." And he's like, "Okay. What do you want to do?" "I want to throw it at him." "Okay. Where do you want to hit him?" He's like, "Can I hit him in the head?" "That's going to be hard, but you can try." He's like, "Okay. go ahead and roll this dice. And he pulls out a dice out of his pocket and he's like, what do I roll for? Higher the number, the more. And they play like a whole round in like 30 seconds.
Yeah. Just a moment.
Just a moment. Story. And by the end of it, he's like, that was really fun. He's like, yeah, you just played Dungeons and Dragons.
That's exactly what it is. Like, you're literally rolling dice for the outcome.
It's like you just as creative as you can get.
Yeah.
You know, that's what makes the game. And I love that you're breaking that down, that what we fear, we easily will marginalize, run from. What we fear often comes from either two things. One, we're not sure of the consequences. Two, we're embarrassed potentially by the choice to want it. But I think also what fear does is it isolates. It just as quickly as you feel united, you also are imperceptionally isolated.
Yeah, you can't live in the dark forever.
No.
Yeah, that's what solitary confinement is. And what happens to people that are in solitary confinement? They go crazy, right?
Yeah.
And
that's why I've heard lawmakers talk about how it's less humane, solitary confinement, than
capital punishment.
Yeah, capital punishment.
Yeah.
They're like, what it does to a person is worse than killing them.
Yeah.
Well, and to come full circle, the Great Divorce, talking about, you know, this idea of heaven and hell is that's what C.S. Lewis says, is you get everything you've ever wanted and no one to share it with.
Yeah.
And that's the ultimate thing. So heaven can be, you get the car, you get the house, you get all the money you ever wanted. You get the job, you can play the guitar, you can do anything that you've dreamed. You can go see every beach, swim in every ocean, but you have to do it alone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's either eternal separation or eternal communion.
Yeah. And he's like, so paint the best picture you can, but if you're by yourself, does it even matter?
Yeah, right.
And so
if a tree falls in the forest, no one
would even know you exist.
Yeah.
So, well, this has been an awesome conversation.
I feel like this might be 2 episodes.
It might be. We might do part 1 and part 2. Jeremiah, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If there's anybody that's listening that you want to drop him another question or ask something that we didn't get to, or maybe there's a part of this that you can highlight for us that you enjoyed. If you have any questions or things that you didn't like, you can always send that to Ryan.
Yes.
Ryan's your man for that.
And I will scare the fear of God into you.
We really enjoyed the conversation, just the way that this feels a lot more about the Creator being giving creation powers that we sometimes call art, but often just call love. Mm-hmm. And this has been a neat discussion, and I think very fruitful for me. So really appreciate it.
Yeah.
As always, hit the subscribe button, leave a review, share it with a friend if you think they'd like it. And till next time, have a great and glorious day in the Lord. We'll see you later.
See ya.